Chapter 511, Illusion_2. The hustle and bustle belong to the living, and have nothing to do with the dead, at least for Nuwa at present. Although many matters related to him were still ongoing, they were no longer of any consequence to him. Perhaps with the coming of the third era, some souls with strong obsessions from their lives could linger in the mortal realm after death, transforming into a different kind of life. But fundamentally, this was not a continuation of their lifespan. Without the balance of a physical body, the characteristics of the spirit were manifested 1,000-fold. Those souls that stayed due to extreme emotions were naturally influenced by said emotions, and before long, they could be considered a different entity with the same memories. Clearly, Nuwa was not among them, as he harbored no intense reluctance, resentment, or regret. So like a soul as ordinary as any other, he was drawn by some invisible guiding force to the underworld and then fell into the waters of the River of Oblivion. The icy waters rushed over his soul, and the current that should have gradually sapped his memories was suddenly blocked. Traces of sacred power surged from Nuwa's soul and easily isolated that force. But under the chill stimulation, the originally transparent soul body quivered slightly. Memories were awakened, just like a cool handful of water wiping one's face in the morning, instantly causing his previously sluggish thoughts to spring back into action. Is this the underworld? With a perplexed expression, Nuwa shook his head. In the past, he had heard of the underworld more than once, and even when bronze humanity was still around, there were rumors that the plagues and diseases in the mortal realm, though released by Pandora, had their origin in the gods of the underworld. Therefore, Hades was viewed by mortals as a deity leaning towards the malevolent side. Even in human city-states that revered the Olympian gods, the existence of Hades was deliberately ignored. No one would carve his statue, as it was considered an ominous symbol. But this had nothing to do with Nuwa, who just looked up at the nether moon in the sky over the surging currents of the Styx River. He had not seen the Archangel before, but he had certainly heard her name more than once. The River of Oblivion rushed forward, and scenes that existed only in legend flashed before Nuwa's eyes. The River of Vows, a fluid made of molten lava, corpses with life that could move. Until at a certain moment, as if passing through an invisible barrier, everything in the underworld was left behind. The surroundings changed abruptly, and what appeared before Nuwa was a new world. For moons of different colors hung in the sky, two of which gave him a familiar feeling. Other tributaries of the Styx converged here, and wherever he looked, there were soul bodies. At the edge of the horizon, seemingly in the center of the world, two colored lights pierced through heaven and earth. They rotated slowly, influencing each other as if elucidating the ultimate principles of the universe. All of this was new to Nuwa, but his mood was exceedingly calm. He had asked the angel for an utterly ordinary death, so he was prepared to be judged at the end of the River of Oblivion for his deeds in life and then cast into the well of reincarnation to begin a new life, or perhaps kept here due to his exceptionally good deeds, doing his best in a new position. But reality did not proceed as he thought it would. As the River of Oblivion flowed, Nuwa suddenly found at a certain moment, the souls that had been traveling with him had vanished, and his location had changed. The river that originated from the all-spirit realm seemed to have been diverted by some force, bringing him to a place dark and immeasurable. Is this chaos intertwined here, and space-time twisted against each other? The moment he arrived here, as the first mortal to reach the 5th level of the spirit realm, Nuwa felt as if millions of lives were speaking in his ears, and endless shadows of light flickered past. In a blur, he seemed to see the earth divide into 4, countless things emerging from the ground. He saw shadows streak across the sky, the sun splitting into 2, then merging back into 1. Everything trembled. 2 indescribable entities confronted each other in the void. Past and future were inverted, reality and illusion blurred. But all these visions were just a trance, and when Nuwa woke from the illusions, he had truly set foot in the 5th layer of the spirit realm. He did not know what he had just seen, but he soon had no more time to think about it. For right in front of him, he saw the figure he had only met once before. An eternal radiance shone upon it, and the world flowed with its breath. Unbeknownst to Nuwa, Lane's power was being unleashed without restraint into space-time to maintain the stability of negative energy, resonating with the entire spirit realm's power. At this moment, Nuwa felt as if he was witnessing the beginning of all things, the ultimate truth, as though time itself wanted to halt before the will of the deity. He bowed his head because even the remnants of the same source sacred power in his soul were straining to protect his existence, and he felt that just one more glance would cause him to completely vanish into nothingness due to his inability to comprehend this supreme law. Nuwa was not afraid of death, but that did not mean he wanted to die in such a ridiculous manner before the throne of a deity. Great Lord of all spirits, source of time and space, your faithful follower presents himself to you. Your incarnation in the mortal realm guided humanity away from destined destruction. And now I have finally fulfilled the mission you entrusted to me, sustaining the spark of civilization in the mortal realm. Now, I have once again come before you. Lane bowed his head, looking at the person prostrated in the void. Just like hundreds of years ago, he could still see that kindness in the other person. But contrary to what the other person believed, he actually did not care about all that he had done in the mortal realm, whether it was leading humans away from disaster or establishing Silver Moon City. He had not paid much attention to it. What he truly cared about was that Nuwa, after having seen it all, after witnessing the near-worshipful reverence some people of Silver Moon City held for him, still retained his unchanged faith. Lane himself had never been a devout person, neither in the past nor now. He had never had a firm faith in anything, existent or non-existent. He had once thought that devout faith came from backwardness, from a lack of knowledge, from ignorance and fear, but reality had proved otherwise. Even Cohen would begin to question the gods as the years passed. Why hadn't Nuwa? That's what he thought, so he asked. The reason he had summoned Nuwa here was just for this question. Why do you have faith in me? The deity asked. Nuwa was slightly taken aback. He had never thought about this question. But in this moment, feeling the breath that seemed like all truths, he believed he should have an answer. Because I think all life in this world needs beliefs to survive, whatever those beliefs may be. It can be the will to live, it can be greed, it can be the good will to help others, or it can be the evil to destroy everything. Nothing in this world can encompass all of these at the same time, except for the world itself. With a slight smile, Lane didn't know if he was satisfied with the answer. He simply raised his hand lightly, granting the response its deserved reward. Chapter 512, Man and Dragon. After a brief Q&A session, Nuwa did not stay on the 5th floor of the spirit realm, for life was never meant to exist here. Without matter and stable spacetime, both the environment itself and the power that Lane exuded unintentionally were an unbearable burden for the souls of mortals. So if he did not want to utterly dissipate in this world, he had to return to one of the previous levels of the spirit realm. Retracing the path he had come from, the sensation of traversing spacetime once again surged in him. But this time, Nuwa did not witness any special visions. The earlier apparitions were like a dream, ethereal and unreal. Feels just like when I was alive. Standing at the edge of the all-spirit realm, Nuwa cast a glance at the dual-colored column of light that reached from the ground to the sky in the distance. The well of reincarnation continued to operate as usual, but he was momentarily at a loss because, at this moment, Nuwa was unclear about what he should do next. Having been received by a deity before, Nuwa had thought he would be given some directive and then granted powerful abilities or a prestigious position. Though he was prepared, he actually wasn't interested in these things, but it turned out he was not. The reward he received was merely the right to choose, only that the scope of choice was slightly broader now. It was similar to the time when in the city built by bronze humanity, the incarnation of the gods did not force humans to do anything. They simply informed them about the covenant with Prometheus, and then left everything for humans to decide. Now, Nuwa was faced with the same type of choice. The difference, however, was that at that time people decided on their life and death. But now, Nuwa was merely deciding how he should continue to live. Of course, he could also give up his life again and opt for the cycles of reincarnation. And with the choice granted by the gods, he was entitled to select any new life he wished, whether the soul was to be reborn as a human or some other form of being. So this is where it gets tricky for me. He sighed. Before today, Nuwa had never thought about such matters because from the several encounters with angels he had, even the more indifferent advance line often came with some guidance or demands. They had never indicated during those encounters the phrase "decide for yourself." It could also be because when the gods wanted humans to decide for themselves, angels simply would not come to the mortal realm. In any case, the situation was as such, and the current predicament was undoubtedly a bit of a surprise. However, for some reason, Nuwa felt a faint sense of loss about it. He had been recognized by the gods, so he was given an audience with a god. But it seemed as if the recognition wasn't quite there, which made him feel somewhat uncertain. So this is human contradiction, just like a child facing their parents. When they want to control everything, often it feels tiresome. But when they cease to control, it can feel somewhat empty. Nuwa had neither parents nor children, but more than once he had seen others become parents, and more than once he had seen their children. At this moment, he felt he had many reflections. So are you bored as well? Suddenly, a crisp voice rang out from beside him. Nuwa couldn't help but step back instinctively, a habit cultivated during early migratory times, but he quickly gathered his bearings. This was the fourth layer of the spirit realm, a domain constantly under the watchful eyes of the spirit realm angels. There were no enemies here, so Nuwa turned around to look in the direction the voice came from. There, a transparent void appeared mid-air, and a life form he had never seen before was poking its head out. She did not seem particularly small, but Nuwa could tell from her eyes that she was likely not very old mentally. "You're making fun of me." The crisp voice rang out again. The newcomer seemed a bit angry. "I can tell you think I'm small. That's not mockery, ma'am." With a smile, Nuwa tried to discern but recognized nothing. In the end, he chose a title based on the voice and tone, and it seemed to have a decent effect. In human society, words like innocent, kind, and beautiful are often associated with children, and many people would prefer to never grow up. So I'm not mocking you. Actually, it's a neutral description. Really? The newcomer's eyes sparkled. Nuwa could confirm that her gemstone-like eyes indeed were glowing, and the mysterious visitor seemed quite pleased. She enlarged the ethereal light circle and then climbed out of it. Soon, her complete form appeared before Nuwa. It was a type of life Nuwa had never seen before, a behemoth also sporting a pair of wings. But unlike the angel's feathered wings, this pair was filled with a palpable strength. The elongated body was covered in fine phosphor armor, and the claws were sharp and lethal. Nuwa had no doubt that even if this life form lacked any exceptional powers, its sheer physique would be enough to dominate in the wilderness of the mortal realm. Of course it's true. A carefree childhood is something that everyone wants, and something to which no one can return. Speaking with a smile, Nuwa looked up slightly, his diminutive body gazing up at the dragon. "Speaking of which, ma'am, I still don't know your name." I am called Isarania. This is my full name. Looks a bit long, doesn't it? So you can also call me by. This was my first name. Chapter 513, Man and Dragon _2. By. It looks like it was just made up on the spot, probably without even thinking about it. Don't change the subject, you still haven't answered my original question. Are you also bored? Seemingly aware of the massive size disparity between herself and the soul dragon in front of her, Bai's form instantly shrank. This wasn't any sort of transformation because Bai's body naturally had no fixed shape. She was a soul dragon, so her size depended solely on how big she wanted to be. I've seen you in mortals' dreams, and in many, many people's dreams at that. In their hearts, you are a very wise person. Striving to appear very serious, Bai raised her head high. However, her next sentence made Nuwa burst out laughing. So you know how to become wise? Or, how to make others think you are wise? A face full of solemnity. Truth be told, as a human, Nuwa found it quite difficult to discern the emotion of solemnity from the face of the dragon before him. Anyhow, Bai had been troubled by this for a long time. In the past, within the dreams of the spirit realm, she had briefly glimpsed the dreams of many lives. There were dreams of wild beasts, humans, and even a few weaker deities. Some were beautiful dreams, others were nightmares, and most were a variety of strange and bizarre dreams. Perhaps because of her innate nature, Isarania was not affected by the content of these dreams. Her spirit remained pure, so even after many years had passed, she was still as she was at birth. For a while, she felt puzzled because the owners of those dreams seemed to grow over time, so she specifically went to ask her creator about it. However, the answer she received left by quite disheartened. The deity told her that soul dragons roaming in dreams would not be influenced by them. If they wanted to grow spiritually, they would have to experience life on their own, not just through observation. After all, if the dreams of other lives really could affect these favored spirits, it would be quite a terrifying thing. Dreams and reality are inherently different, with the absurd and bizarre often being the dominant elements. Even the kindest person in reality could become a destroyer of worlds in the unconscious realm of dreams. So, to prevent the soul dragons from inexplicably all turning into evil spirit dragons, they were given a considerable degree of resistance to dreams from the very beginning. Perhaps ordinary dragons might be influenced by the dreams of the powerful, but for Isarania, there were no such exceptions. Because she could not sense the dreams of the truly powerful deities, and other life forms were not considered powerful to her. Therefore, seeing Nua's smile, I flapped her wings in annoyance. Don't laugh, you haven't answered my question. I'm seriously asking you. If you can't answer it, I'm going to take you back to my domain, where you'll think day and night, every night, until you come up with an answer. Ahem. Indeed, that was rude of me, Lady Bai, and for that I am truly sorry. Bowing slightly and reining in his smile, Nua expressed his apologies to the giant dragon before him. Whether dealing with adults or children, he certainly shouldn't have laughed like that. Though he wasn't mocking her, quite the opposite, Nua just found it all very amusing. He was accustomed to the children of Silver Moon City treating him with utmost respect under their parents' guidance, or as they grew up, developing various emotions towards him, like admiration, envy, desire, or jealousy and defiance. But the being before him was clearly an exception. She evidently was a native life form of the spirit realm, having glimpsed him through the dreams of mortals, but she didn't consider his negligible achievements of any importance. She too possessed great power, and although she restrained herself, Nua, in his soul state, could clearly sense the instinctive trembling of his own soul in her presence. What a good child! Standing upright, Nua felt his perplexity vanish. His affairs in the mortal realm had concluded, yet he felt he had rediscovered some value in life. Not in doing mundane tasks day after day beside the well of reincarnation, nor in being endowed with power and suddenly becoming an almost divine eternal being. Compared to those, he much preferred to disseminate ideas, much like spreading the faith of the Lord to every creature he encountered on the path of leading human migration, just as he imparted his principles to the people of Silver Moon City. So if within the Lord's domain, he could continue such a life within the grand ancient spirit world, and share with its inhabitants that beyond lies a race called humans, kind and creative, it would certainly be a venture worth pursuing. He was willing to dedicate his efforts, using all that he possessed, to make it a reality. Regarding your question, Miss Bai, this is not something that can be resolved in a short time. With a smile, Nua said softly, "Humph, it doesn't matter, I can wait." With a humph, Bai's mood seemed to have improved considerably. Clearly, being addressed as Miss Bai by Nua made her very happy. So what do I need to do? There's no rush before I make you, mature and full of wisdom. I first need to understand the environment you live in. How about, as you suggested, you take me to see your domain? Great. Her eyes sparkled again but were quickly restrained by Bai. It was her first time inviting someone into her home, because nobody usually paid attention to her requests. So she tried to act as if it were normal, once again drawing the illusory circle of light behind her. Behind the circle of light, there was what looked like a small nest. Come with me. With a cheerful voice, Bai went through the circle of light first. She looked back and urged Nua to follow, who promptly did. In the span of just one day, he had faced life and death, arrived at a realm from the myths, met the creator of all, and would now witness the world of dreams. Nuwa felt lucky. He planned to record these experiences in a travelogue. If there was a chance in the future, he would entrust someone to take it back to the mortal realm. All would pass away, but knowledge and civilization would endure. Thousands of years later, people were still using the skills from the Golden Age. Nuwa hoped that one day in the distant future, people would find his travelogue from the pile of old papers, and then they would know there was a silver moon city, and that a person named Nuwa had once visited the realm of gods. Although the thought didn't seem very auspicious, much like how the silver moon city might not persist for thousands of years, Nuwa didn't think anything was impossible, especially since even the faux divine court of the pseudo-gods could collapse. So he took a step forward, and as the lights shifted, Nuwa undoubtedly made his choice. Standing in the fifth layer of the spirit realm, Lane watched this scene unfold, without much thought. In that moment, he seemed to have inadvertently glimpsed a corner of the future, as when he entered the fifth layer of the spirit realm, it seemed to resonate with destiny for an instant. But Lane did not intend to ask about the outcome, just as he never prophesied for himself. Death and rebirth. Shaking his head slightly, Lane withdrew his gaze. It was not about the present death or the current rebirth, but what destiny hinted at, a possible event in the future. However, for him, the future was always uncertain, so Lane simply made a note of it. The affairs of humans and gods were at a pause for now, and the world was about to enter a long period of tranquility. Not until the 100-headed dragons and serpents rose from the ground would chaos become lively again. As for what was to follow, it seemed to be the true beginning of the myth. 500 years in the mortal realm. As if time, put on pause, began to flow again, the river of time roared on. But for gods, perhaps the only difference from the past was that the mortal realm from then on had winters. Chapter 514, The Missing Princess. The long winter ended, and all things began to grow. Since the heavy snow had faded from the mortal realm, the world changed its appearance. The various changes that had ceased due to the shift in seasons seemed to resume their proper course. Signs of life re-emerged outside the ruins that had been turned into wastelands by natural and man-made disasters, and the traces of mortal activities once again spread out towards the east and the south. Perhaps one day, they would reach the East Sea and encounter those who were once of the same origin but had been taken to the seas, viewing them as foreign visitors. No matter from which perspective, the current chaos world greatly differs from the Greece of later generations. The disparity exists not only in the loss of culture and legend but also geographically. After all, by comparing maps, one can find that the later Greek peninsula is a landmass extending from northwest to southeast, jutting deeply into the Mediterranean Sea as the southernmost part of the Balkan Peninsula. Constantinople, built between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, lies beside it, and the peninsula itself is interspersed with straits and rivers. This is a location in mythological records where water was more abundant than land because many of the legendary stories didn't occur on this peninsula at all. For example, the Caucasus Mountains in the east, which were originally a place of Prometheus's imprisonment, are actually the territories of later Russia, separated from Athens by several distances of Greece. At the junction of the Eurasian continent, the famous Strait of Gibraltar is topped with a massive rock known as the Pillars of Hercules. This was also considered the end of the Western world to the Greeks, a place where Heracles once arrived during his 12 labors. In such circumstances, if one were to draw a map with the aforementioned landmarks on the eastern and western sides, the Greek peninsula would indeed seem insignificant in comparison. It would appear too small no matter what it is measured against. But obviously, the current chaos world does not have a vast Mediterranean Sea, nor does it have numerous straits. What should be the Iberian Peninsula facing Greece across the sea became part of the continent. The land of Egypt in the south was not yet part of chaos, and many places to the southeast of Greece naturally transformed into large islands. Of course, this is a world that is many times larger, so those large islands could actually be termed as mini-continents, capable of supporting tens of millions of people in their lives and even establishing independent kingdoms. Phoenicia was such a place, a kingdom later located on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea and facing Cyprus, now became an island nation, surrounded by the Ionian Sea, which is not the name of a game, but a real sea area to the west of the Greek peninsula of later generations. However, now it has come to the eastern side of the continent. How this kingdom of humans came into being is now unknown. The humans on the land still possessed the skills and wisdom of at least a previous era, using these to record history and develop civilization. However, the humans at sea did not inherit these completely. Poseidon sneered at the earthly things of those mortals, allowing these ant-like lives to grow wildly on land. After all, as long as they stayed at sea, they had to revere the Sea Emperor, who controlled storms, tsunamis, and earthquakes. Therefore, the history of the Phoenician kingdom was interrupted for some time. Although they inherited the transcendent powers passed down by their ancestors, recalling the tales of the deities, that was all there was to it. In short, Phoenicia had become very different from the humans of the mainland. Under the reign of King Agenor, they lived and worked in peace and contentment, with primitive farming and fishing as their livelihood. The divine king who could bring torrential rain and thunder and Poseidon who ruled the seas were revered as principal gods, in hopes of protecting the nation from natural disasters. Until this day, an unexpected event caused turmoil in the kingdom. The royal guards imposed martial law in Sidon, Tyre, and the three princes, each with transcendent martial skills, were summoned back to the city from various locations. The king was in a rage and everyone knew why. Phoenicia's sole princess, Europa, had recently disappeared. And most crucially, no matter how one looks at it, this disappearance doesn't seem like a natural event but appears to be premeditated by some intelligent life. Crack. The exquisite pottery shattered into pieces on the ground as Agenor stood expressionlessly in the palace within his royal residence. In front of him stood three valiant young men with their heads bowed in silence. They understood why their father was angry. In fact, even their own hearts were filled with anxiety. Not long earlier, one summer afternoon, the Princess Europa, who had been playing with friends by the seaside, was carried away by a wild bull under the watchful eyes of many. The princess had only mounted its back. This beautiful and gentle bull was indeed charming, and then it bolted. It ran faster than a flying horse, treating the sea surface as stable as the land. In the blink of an eye, the princess's figure vanished over the western sea, leaving behind agitated companions who then frantically reported everything to the king of Phoenicia. The king's fury knew no bounds, for he and Queen Telephassa had 3 sons but only 1 daughter. Europa's beauty was unsurpassed in the kingdom. She was lauded as a girl kissed by the goddess of beauty. But now she had vanished so mysteriously. Chapter 515 The Missing Princess _2. So now, Phoenix, Kilkis, and Cadmos, the 3 wise and valiant princes, had just returned to the palace together, awaiting their father's command. I believe you all know what has happened. After a long silence, King Agenor looked at his 3 children. A bull took away your sister, whom you all had sworn to protect. But now, her whereabouts are unknown. It was certainly no accident, Phoenix said, looking at his father, but Agenor's expression remained unchanged. Of course, I know it was no accident. No bull knows how to use its appearance to attract humans, nor can any bull run across the surface of the sea. There must be some entity's directive behind this, perhaps some sea monster that can beguile the mind, or some vile demonic monster. There's no need for you to remind me. His voice growing louder, Agenor was still in the prime of his life. An invisible pressure rose up around him. He was not only a king but also a mighty warrior capable of battling sea monsters. Looking at his 3 sons, whom he felt proud of, an idea arose in the king's mind. He had once been proud of the excellence of his offspring, but that pride had turned to worry. Since he had 3 sons instead of 1, he would eventually have to choose one to inherit his throne. Europa had been taken away a day ago, and the king no longer believed she could be brought back unharmed. But perhaps, on this pretext, he might select an excellent new king for Phoenicia. Thus, standing at the center of the palace, Agenor stated clearly and slowly, "You should go and find your sister, the one you swore to protect. Neither the sea nor the earth should serve as an excuse for you to back down. Bring Europa back, all of you must go. 10 years from now, whether you have found her or not, you must return here. Does anyone wish to defy my command? No, father. Kneeling on one knee, Cadmos spoke solemnly, and his brothers followed suit. There were no complaints. They all recognized this as a responsibility they should fulfill as elder brothers. Very well, then prepare to depart. I have had the necessary supplies for crossing the sea prepared for you. With your fighting skills, you should be safe along the way. With a slight nod, Agenor waved his hand. The kingdom of Phoenicia had more than one city, and previously he had thought to measure their abilities by their governance. Hence, he had sent all 3 sons away. But as they all had performed well, he was forced to change his mind. However, this also meant that he had already arranged for the supplies on their return journey. The king turned away, no longer looking at his 3 sons. And after exchanging glances, the princes also left the palace one by one. Soon only he was left in the palace. The king stood silently for a while, then slowly sat back down on his throne. Agenor's gaze lingered next to a sculpture on the wooden table, a gift from Europa to her father, depicting his youthful feat of slaying sea monsters. Although I sent them to look for you, you probably won't be able to come back. After a silent moment, the king seemed to be talking to himself. Abul. Ha! Deities. In the deep ocean far away, on Crete Island, a golden-haired deity was contently admiring the seascape. He was unaware of the events unfolding in the Phoenician palace. In fact, he paid no attention to what that human nation was called. Had he heard Agenor's sighs, he would probably have laughed at the mortal's shallow insights. All gods knew that, although many liked to turn into animals, he was the only one who used this method to let a woman lower her guard. Once upon a time, it was Hera who was beguiled in such a way when the divine king transformed into an injured cuckoo bird to gain sympathy. Now, his actions bore a similar kind of craftiness. Given the choice, Zeus didn't prefer to enjoy these beauties through crude and brute force, especially when he had just ended a long slumber and was eager to find some amusement. Turning into a bull, he took the kind and beautiful human princess to an unfamiliar island, lured monsters with tricks, and then, assuming another identity, made a benevolent entrance to play the hero's rescue. Zeus didn't think his rough performance could deceive the human princess for long, but it would suffice for a day or two. By now, he had already achieved his desire and still had time to come here to watch the sea. As for whether the clever princess would realize something was amiss in a few days, the divine king thought that playing the hero was fun, but the look of anger and despair on her face when she realized he was the mastermind, yet was powerless against him, was an even greater joy. This effectively relieved the dullness of a long slumber and energized the great king of all gods. Whether the human princess and her family were willing to make this sacrifice was of no concern to Zeus. Just as a butcher doesn't seek an animal's consent before slaughtering it, a deity doesn't need the approval of mortals to do as they please. Zephyrus. It seems Hera is still staying comfortably in her own palace? The sea breeze blew, lifting the hem of the divine king's garment. Everything seemed so natural, but Zeus keenly sensed the unusual nature of this breeze. However, Zeus was not surprised, for it was he who had instructed the god of West Wind to keep a close watch on the heavenly empress. It was for this reason he wasn't on the mainland chasing beauties. Yes, your majesty, as per your prescient vision, the heavenly empress doesn't fancy prying into the domains over the sea. Bowing slightly, the god of West Wind appeared beside him. Good. It appears this trick can still serve a few more times. Pleased, Zeus did not expect to keep deceiving Hera indefinitely, but any trouble he could avoid was preferable. With this thought, the divine king tilted his head slightly. He appraised Zephyrus, who, at the brink of his slumber, had married his daughter Euphrosyne. Therefore, they were now family. Your power has grown significantly over the years. Zeus spoke dispassionately, and Zephyrus was, as always, obliging. I have your majesty's generosity to thank for this. Ha! It's a shame that the first to break through with the power of faith to achieve formidable divine power was Helios and not you. And the sun indeed proves a bit too challenging to handle. Shaking his head, the divine king said no more. Helios's foundation was indeed not something that a minor god of west wind could compare to. Even today, Zephyrus's inherent godhood was still only enough to maintain weak divine power. He had indeed considered replacing Helios, but there was no rush, particularly as Apollo not only had no interest but even admitted his inadequacy for the task. The power in the divine court is rising too slowly. Now that my injuries have healed, it's time to quicken the pace. Zeus, lacking any semblance of grace, stretched and felt it was time to make up for the time wasted during his slumber. I might speed up tomorrow instead. 1 or 2 days don't matter much. At least, not until I lose interest in this princess. As if convincing himself, Zeus turned and walked back towards the center of the island. Chapter 5:16 Typhon. Crete Island, the place where Zeus was born and raised, saw the divine king grant his bloodline to a mortal once again. However, this time, perhaps because the much stronger Zeus had prepared in advance, or possibly because he left his thunder on Mount of the Gods as a diversion, the heavenly empress was completely unaware of the anomaly here. Meanwhile, 3 rafts from the beaches of the Phoenician kingdom made their way into the sea. Without sails, helpers, or even sea charts, the brave princes embarked on a journey to find their sister. Full of confidence, they agreed to meet again in 10 years. Then, wielding heavy oars, they set off in directions toward where Europa had vanished. It was just an ordinary day, nothing more than an amorous pursuit by the divine king. Yet even Zeus himself did not realize that as the king of all gods, increasingly bound by the laws of this world, his every action actually brought consequences, big or small. So, when the 3 princes left the kingdom, and when one of them finally crossed the vast sea to touch land, deep within the earth, a change that could have occurred long ago finally took its last step. To an outsider looking to blend into a realm that rejects its existence, the best way is to wear a layer of the native skin. And for Chaos, the most useful skin in the world was undoubtedly its own deeply scarred fate. Drip drip. Drip drip. Drip drip. In the vast cavern, a light red liquid continuously dropped from above, splattering on the ground. Dense patterns spread among the rocks, naturally formed, yet seemingly like meridians and blood vessels. It looked as if they would subtly pulsate whenever you turned your gaze away. In the grand cavity, no sound but the water droplets could be heard. No living creatures could be seen. The only exception was a woman standing on a rock to the east. That was Gaia, and at this moment, she was looking up toward the sky. Although her vision was filled only with stone, it did not prevent Gaia from seeing through the earth to the clouds, the flora, dewdrops, the rising sun, and Olympus in the east. She had been here for many years, as if everything outside was of no concern to her. For all those years, no one else had visited this place, and her encounter with Helios was just a singular event. In fact, even though Gaia had given the sun god a part of the mother tree's power, she was not very clear about his current fate. Of course, Gaia didn't really care much about it either. After all, although the power of the mother tree was strong, there wasn't much that she could release. Even with Helios accepting this power, he would not have gained the strength to rival Zeus in the world. In contrast, Gaia and her offspring were significantly different. One held the stature of a primordial deity capable of bypassing the world's seal to receive as much power as possible, while the other was directly nurtured by the mother tree itself, inherently tied to that outer god in an indelible way. Thus, in Gaia's eyes, Helios was merely the result of her whims. At best, he was a pawn that could prove to be somewhat useful, not the key that could determine the outcome. The god-demon about to be born was her real reliance. It would do what she wanted to do on her behalf and become the sharpest sword in her hand. Yes, having learned from her past mistake, Gaia was no longer planning to take action herself. She might be a bit emotional at times, but she wasn't truly foolish. She just hadn't adjusted her attitude correctly. When Uranus was still around, Gaia was known to be patient and scheming in the shadows. But after the first divine king's eternal slumber, his successors were always seen as juniors by her, especially Zeus. This disparity in perception caused Gaia to face her opponent incorrectly, and compounded by repeated losses, ultimately led to her mad attempt to break through Mount of the Gods. But now she had calmed down and recognized reality once again. Thus, facing Zeus once more, Gaia chose another approach. Just like with the silver humanity back then, at that time, Erebus provided the power, assisting me in troubling Lane. When everything was revealed, it was he and Lane who clashed, and from beginning to end, it had little to do with me. In silent contemplation, Gaia, still unaware of the reasons behind the golden apple tree changing hands, made such a judgment and felt it was time to face Zeus, the third-generation divine king, properly. She didn't need to take action herself, which would further incur sanctions from the world against her. Better let that monster deal with Zeus. Once, Erebus lacked the ability to create life, so she substituted for him. Now, the Flesh Mother tree couldn't send too much power through the seal, so it needed her to foster it, a scene so very similar. She just needed to replicate what she had already done. If it succeeded, then it would be perfect. If it failed, she would just let Zeus and that terrible creature battle it out. In her heart, even though Gaia now worked with the Mother Tree as an associate, she had never trusted that life form, perfect enough to send a chill down her spine. Chapter 517, Typhon_2. The existence sealed by the world, possessing the power to easily replenish her loss as a primordial deity, and incidentally the power to conceive a demon god, is terrifying just to think about. If she weren't a primordial deity, protected by the current world along with her spirit, Gaia would not have so readily accepted the other's power. Fortunately, there were no ifs in reality, so in her heart, Gaia silently applauded her own actions. Indeed, her greatest failure since her divine birth had come from Zeus, and it was simply because she had not adjusted her mentality properly. As long as she treated this new divine king in the same manner as she treated the other primordial gods, everything would turn out fine. Lost in thought, Gaia suddenly felt an unusual quiet around her. The constant dripping sound that had been falling had stopped at some unknown point, completely silencing the vast emptiness. It was like the calm before the storm, as if some terrifying change had occurred. However, Gaia, who had noticed these changes, was not alarmed but rather delighted, because she knew exactly what that dripping sound was. It wasn't actual water, but a fluid flowing from the branches of the Flesh Mother tree. It was the best nourishment in the world, constantly nurturing the growth of something beneath the ground. And now that it had stopped, the reason was obvious. The vague consciousness of the Mother Tree had once expressed the right moment, and perhaps that moment had arrived today. Crack, crack, crack. She looked down towards the stratified layers, and as if responding to Gaia's gaze, fine cracks began to spread among the rocks on the floor of the cavity. The earth trembled slightly, as if something was about to break through the soil. Watching this scene, Gaia couldn't help but burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. Good. Very good. You're finally coming out. I have been waiting for you for so long. Joy spread across Gaia's face. Her most proud creation, the offspring capable of completely compensating for her shortcomings in battle, was finally about to descend upon the world. Soon, everything she lost would be reclaimed. For now, all she needed to do was to witness its birth. My child, my smallest child, I can't wait to see you. Come, Typhon, come into this world, ascend Mount Olympus, and punish those who offended me. Punish the arrogant divine king. Her voice echoed in the underground cavity, but it was easily drowned out by thunderous noise. The earth's tremors grew more intense, and a dark, gloomy light surged from the cracks. After a short while, under Gaia's expectant gaze, a massive head emerged from the shattered rock layers below, then rose high into the air. It was a head that resembled that of a dragon. If not for the accident in the Nine Realms, it would have been the progenitor of the dragons of chaos. The monster called Typhon, though it had more than one head, this one was undoubtedly its most vital one. As its eyes opened, Gaia, locking gaze with it, seemed to see endless slaughter and destruction. But this only pleased her more. This was the sword she needed, the weapon to slay the divine king. Have you awakened, Typhon? Can you understand my words? Levitating her body, Gaia positioned herself above the dragon head. Although everything was as she had envisioned, to ensure that Typhon, enhanced by the Mother Tree's power, could indeed communicate, Gaia still made a point to confirm. The result satisfied her. Although the huge dragon head did not respond, and even as a second head emerged amidst the earth's quivering, Gaia still saw reason in the creature's eyes. It seemed influenced by its instincts, but it was still able to communicate. That was enough. So, lifting herself higher towards the top of the cavity, Gaia spoke out loud. Typhon, since you can understand me, come out quickly. Go and overturn Olympus for me. Dethrone the divine king. Boom! The loud noise returned, and as Gaia spoke, Typhon's ninth head also emerged from the ground. Perhaps due to its inherent traits, each time a head was raised, the rest would swell. At this moment, 18 enormous eyes larger than Gaia herself gazed up at this being hovering in midair. Staring at the entity with an essence somewhat akin to its own, Typhon spoke its first words. Who am I? Raising an eyebrow, Gaia was somewhat taken aback by the beast's response, but she still explained. You are a monster, a demon, destined to destroy Olympus as Typhon. Destruction is the purpose of your birth. You should be able to feel the agitation in your blood as well. Then who are you? 18 dragon heads hung in the cavity. The space that was once like an underground world now seemed a bit crowded. Yet Typhon seemed not to mind this detail and just stared at Gaia, asking its second question. I am the deity who nurtured you, Typhon, the Mother Earth of Chaos. All things are born upon my body. I am the foundation of the world. Frowning slightly, but Gaia still offered an explanation. Then this divine king you speak of, what is that? 36 heads now packed the entire cavity. The underground world carved out by Gaia could no longer contain the giant. The rocky walls trembled, on the verge of collapse. But seeing this scene, Gaia felt somewhat elated. Chapter 518, Typhon_3. For those monsters that were not gods, the smaller ones may not be weak, but the larger ones were certainly strong. And the one before her was destined to be the strongest of them all. The Divine King is the nominal master of everything in the world, and he is also your enemy. Gazing at her own creation, Gaia slowly began to speak, her tone rising slightly. And you must topple the Divine King to the ground and snatch everything that belongs to him into your hands. Booming, the loud noise continued, and the earth finally began to crack open. More and more dragon heads rose from the ground. The cavity that existed underground should have collapsed, but instead, it was propped open by the behemoth. It did not ask another question as if it had already learned everything it wanted to know. Red mist floated among Typhon's heads like a barrier that encircled it. What you mean is, I understand. Understand. Got it. It. In unison, yet mixing with each other, different in pitch, identical in tone. When the 100th head emerged from beneath the earth, it was as if Typhon had truly arrived in this world. But while its body was still buried underground, these protruding heads were like icebergs floating on the ocean's surface. However, compared to Typhon, Gaia encountered a slight problem. She hadn't anticipated that it would have such an enormous body, nor had she taken any precautions, causing a large area of strata to be lifted around the cavity she had opened. The previous surprise at her creation's power made her overlook this detail, but now a faint pain reminding her of her body told her that if Typhon were to emerge like this, she would certainly be significantly hurt. Stop! Gaia shouted. Your body is too large. Let me split the strata so you can freely enter and exit. Boom! Gaia's voice was cut off. Typhon paid no heed to her. As if tired of the crowded heads, the 100-headed dragon serpent lifted its long necks, and flames spewed from its 200 eyes. As it moved, the earth fell silent for a moment, then was violently torn apart. The result for Gaia was a series of cuts opening on the surface of her skin. With wide eyes, Gaia hadn't expected Typhon to ignore her words so disdainfully. She had many rebellious children before, but none chose to defy her will just after birth. But clearly, the 100-headed monster didn't care about her feelings at all. It simply pulled hard, lifting its body from the strata, and then, with all its might, pushed its heads upwards. Crack! The vast expanse of land was pushed open by it, and the evening sky was exposed to the monster's gaze. Seeing the outside world for the first time, Typhon's eyes flickered with an odd light. The newly born demon god seemed to be enamored with the beautiful scene. But the next instant, only brutality and a killing intent remained in its eyes. It was born for destruction, yes, its lineage told it so. Typhon saw the deity that claimed to have created it follow it out of the ground, glimpsing Gaia's pale, angry face as if she was trying to say something to it. It seemed to be something about a helper, sneak attack, Zeus or the like, but it didn't care. Despite being injured because of its existence, she still tolerated it and tried to reason with it. Such a being dared to instruct it? But she was right about one thing. If the Divine King truly is the master of everything in this world, then I should replace him. The low voice echoed through the mountains, and the moon at the end of the west heaven seemed to hasten its pace out of fright. But Typhon paid no attention to them. It simply raised its 100 heads, declaring its arrival to the world. Because I am the sovereign of monsters. I am the king of all monsters, Typhon.
Chapter 519 Surprise change.
Typhon, or Typhon as he is also known, when he was born actually had a far greater impact than many imagined. To Typhon himself, he was merely announcing his presence to the world. To Gaia, it was the long-awaited weapon that didn't quite seem to obey her commands, finally arriving in this world. But for many others, both gods and mortals, the birth of Typhon was like a huge stone thrown into a lake, instantly stirring up towering waves. Before the realm of lightness, within a realm that seemed to devour everything. Since the incident with the golden apple tree, this ancient god born at the dawn of creation had quieted down again. Few knew what he had done, or if he had simply done nothing. After all, under his unique authority, even Lane could not detect his movements. In any case, the primordial deity who seemed to be attempting to break free from the shackles of the current world did not appear to be in a hurry. His actions did not seem to exhibit a strong sense of purpose, at least not on the surface. However, this day was ultimately special. Almost the moment Typhon's first head emerged from the crevice in the ground, Erebus was drawn to the subtle yet familiar fluctuation. He set aside his current task and appeared in an instant at the border between his domain and the underworld. The vast expanse of the underworld was as usual, seemingly unaffected by an external influence. This was not surprising. After all, the birth of Typhon had only just begun, and there was still an entire underworld separating it from the underworld proper. Yet, amidst the haze, Erebus could already see another kind of change beginning. Starting from the edges of the underworld, a pale red mist was spreading. Something had been cracked open. When a great entity recognized by the fortunes of the current world descended, Niflheim and the outside world finally obtained a true anchor point, allowing a sliver of its power a small outlet. Unlike with Gaia and Helios, who could only communicate with their respective domains, the advent of Typhon introduced a direct flaw in the seal. Observing this scene, Erebus's face was unreadable. Although this change was inseparably connected to him, he seemed to have no intention of intervening. It escaped my perception. First it resided in my grasp, then became dormant, and finally seduced Gaia. Ha! I was wondering why she had grown so quiet after being chastised by Zeus for all these years. Remarkable, did it acquire some trait beyond greatness? No wonder it was sealed within that small realm. The threat you pose to the current world is far greater than any primordial god. Beside the abyss, in another realm that existed alongside Tartarus, away from the world, Erebus had long discovered Niflheim, bound tightly by the chains of law. After all, he had ventured inside and been wounded there before. As time passed, the Lord of Darkness also noticed that the law chains binding it were increasingly weakening, or more precisely, they were being replaced. Originally, the blockade was imposed by Chaos World itself, but it had gradually been replaced by the current world's law chains. Although the number of chains had increased, their power had decreased. Erebus could infer the reasons behind all this, in accordance with the innate knowledge of a primordial god. The outsider was integrating into this world, so the world's own restrictions on it lessened. But its act of assimilation prompted the world of order to perceive a significant threat, so more fetters were applied in response. However, it now seemed that all these efforts were in vain. The strongest fortresses are often breached from within, and nobody would think that the Fleshmother tree could directly break the shackles imposed on Niflheim. But now it had circumvented those constraints and emerged in this world. With Gaia as an inside agent, the current world seals became a joke. The underworld is of no concern to me. The underworld, Nethermoon, and Styx River are its targets for erosion, but the divine trees and dragon eggs of the underground world must remain untouched. With a step, light and shadow shifted, and Erebus arrived before the twin golden apple tree. The next moment, an invisible force was applied throughout the entire underground space, completely turning it into a secret. Although the outcome suggested that the life authority once pinned with high hopes by the Lord of Darkness did not erode the power of the Fleshmother tree, and even quietly allowed it to leave and seduce Gaia, this did not mean that the life authority was unimportant. Similar authorities were effective. There was just a misjudgment beforehand. After all, Erebus originally thought the outer god was merely a being mightier than himself, but it seems now that it may be far more terrifying than any entity of chaos. A vessel that carried the heritage of a world's destruction. Even if only a part, this granted the outer god born from the old body of the world tree Yggdrasil unimaginable benefits. Even if it had not become a truly great power transcending the present world by half a measure, it had acquired certain traits. Therefore, the fragmentation of the life vase proved ineffective, but in the end, it was useless against it alone. The branch that pierced Erebus's left hand was the main body of the Fleshmother tree. Indeed, that part possessed an unimaginable immortality trait, but the ensuing forces anchored by it did not.
Chapter 520 Surprise change 2.
Moanda, still in Olympus, let her stay there. Looking around, the god of life had been very active since his rebirth, and it was only natural that she wasn't here. However, Erebus didn't care. As long as the golden apple tree, her true body, was still in his hands, she wouldn't be able to escape anywhere. Boom! A massive sound came from above, seemingly the noise of Typhon breaking through the earth, but it didn't affect the secret underworld at all. It was as if it didn't exist, letting the tremendous noise sweep past it, rushing into the underworld. For a moment, the gray earth became bustling. In the fields of truth, even Hades couldn't help but stand up from his throne to investigate the source of the disturbance. But he clearly found nothing, until that declaration echoed from the ground, reverberating across the land of the underworld. I am the king of all monsters, Typhon. The spirit realm's seventh layer, Mount Sinai. The mountain that spanned the 7 layers of the spirit realm had grown even more majestic and vast. As the axis of the spirit realm, it naturally grew stronger with the perfection of the realm itself. The changes in the 5th layer of the spirit realm were undoubtedly reflected on it, as when the negative energy realm was recently completed, the inner realm construction also succeeded halfway. Accordingly, Mount Sinai rose a notch higher and even began to possess some unique powers. Lane even suspected that, by the day all 7 layers of the spirit realm were forged, this Mount Sinai might also possess its own symbol. After all, the Pillar of Chaos might just be a tool supporting the sky, but Mount Sinai is an indispensable part of the spirit realm. But those were matters for the future. At this moment, Lane, who had just become free for not 2 days, suddenly looked up from the Temple of Lops. Even earlier than Erebus, as soon as Typhon began to carry out its destiny within the original trajectory, its existence was completely exposed to Lane's eyes. Lane couldn't see it. He couldn't peer through the body of the earth to see the demon wrapped inside, not yet arrived in the world. But Typhon's presence was so intense that even at its birth, it caused boundless tumult in the Sea of Origins and fate itself. This was natural, the former because of its terrible power, and the latter goes without saying. Although there are many versions of the myth in later generations and Typhon's combat power is a matter of debate, within the entire mythology record, an entity capable of wounding Zeus even in just one version is exceptionally rare. It seemed to inherently have some sort of restraining relationship with the throne of the divine king, like two poles opposite of Zeus. In the original trajectory, Typhon's father was Tartarus, the source of chaos, and its birth might symbolize chaos's backlash against order. Now, it went even further. When Lane noticed this new version of Typhon, he even doubted he had mistaken the target. Had chaos become so unreliable that it allowed the power of the Flesh Mother tree to bypass its seal? However, this doubt was fleeting, as Lane immediately realized that there must be another reason for all this. Perhaps there were remnants of the Mother Tree's power in other fragments of the Nine Realms. Although he had found this outer god in Niflheim, it didn't rule out the possibility of her power in other fragments. Or perhaps it was related to the Lord of Darkness. After all, both had been in contact with the Mother Tree. If it wasn't Lane's doing, then Erebus would undoubtedly be another suspect. But in any case, what's done is done, and dwelling on it now is pointless. The spirit realm isn't the first target of the Flesh Mother Tree. Just the name Typhon is innately at odds with Zeus, and until the Divine King is dealt with, the foe would have no time to trouble him. But then the question arises, can Typhon defeat Zeus? Lane did not know the process, but he was not optimistic about the outcome. If it were merely a matter of strength to replace the Divine King, Zeus wouldn't have survived until today. Liana, I am here, Your Highness. In a soft reply, Liana in her purple dress responded as always, and Lane, without further explanation, handed the Codex of Creation to her. Protect the Nether Moon well. Do not let any force contaminate it. Yes, Your Highness. Taking the divine artifact, Liana obediently complied. Although she did not yet know who her enemy was, Lane must have seen something she was not aware of. And whoever it was, they would not touch the gateway to the spirit realm in her presence. Aster. Calling out once more, Lane summoned the goddess of starlight, a constant presence in the night sky. In the next moment, a light silvery glow converged, and the other party appeared before him. I am here, Your Highness. Reduce the activity in the zodiacal star domain, and do not interfere with earthly affairs. As for later, I may be away for a while. How you act will be up to you to decide. With a tap of his finger on the armrest, Lane hesitated for a moment but ultimately retrieved an object he had just deemed useless. It might not possess inherent harmfulness, but it could indeed harmonize the powers of the zodiac regions, and perhaps it could also serve as a defensive artifact. Among the deities of the present world, you know which are related to the spirit realm and which are not. The stars will be in your hands for the time being. But if you can't make a decision, consult with others. Speaking calmly, Lane encouraged. You can do well. The worst outcome is merely returning to the spirit realm. A few star domains are not a big deal. I understand, Your Highness. Nodding in compliance, though still somewhat hesitant, Aster took leave to carry out the orders. Consequently, Lane then sequentially arranged a few other matters. Finally, with everything in order, he rose from his seat. Since the creation of the spirit realm, he had never truly been away for an extended period, but this time it seemed unavoidable. The arrival of Typhon represented another interaction between Chaos and the Heminu world, but Lane did not believe it was simply a matter of receiving the spoils of war. Due to his presence, Chaos's timeline was advanced by at least a few thousand years, and nobody knew how much resistant force remained in that other world, but it was almost certain to be substantial. Forget about destroying it, even figuring out how to enter that world was a challenge that needed careful consideration. The once fragmented remnants of the Nine Realms, Lane and Erebus only dared to enter when the residual world force was on the verge of complete collapse, let alone a complete world. However, it was essential to go and see first and decide later. That being the case, Nyx has suddenly become crucial. Shaking his head, Lane had not anticipated the abrupt emergence of Typhon, but it was not really a problem. Having arranged so many things, it was time to keep his promise and search for Nyx in the land of eternal night. With a step forward, Lane moved to the outside world. Just as he was about to proceed, he involuntarily came to a halt. For in the sky above the underworld, a massive voice was heard. "The king of all monsters, huh?" After a moment of silence, Lane did not linger any longer. "It is just a tragedy after all." In the mortal realm on Crete Island, Zeus had slipped away from Mount of the Gods for what seemed like the umpteenth time. He found this human princess truly captivating. So much so that a significant amount of time had passed, and he still hadn't lost interest in her. Today was no different. Under Europa's hateful gaze, not only did the divine king feel untroubled, but he was also quite pleased. Chapter 521, Heroic Spirit. In later ages of the East there once was such a tale. In the vast land of the Red Countenances, after the first empire that unified the domain post the period of feudal chaos crumbled, mortals aspiring to the supreme position rose up against one another, with regional lords vying for control. They wrought bloodshed upon the mortal realm, with countless ingenious strategies and distinguished individuals emerging abruptly, yet contrary to many people's expectations, the one who ultimately became the new ruler of the world was a minor official from a small town. However, when looking back at history, this was actually not very surprising. After all, slaves can become generals, beggars can split the land and proclaim themselves emperors. This shows that a person's achievements are related to their birth, but not absolutely so. In any case, this old troublemaker who was no longer young when he started out ultimately succeeded in unifying the lands and ascended to the highest position among mortals. But it's easier to conquer the world than to defend it. Not only did he have to contend with all kinds of political intrigue, but the seasoned warrior also shockingly discovered that many of his brothers in arms, who had fought for the world alongside him and who were not from noble or affluent backgrounds, were more like butchers and dog killers. Incidents of drinking nectar and brawling in court, drawing swords and striking pillars, continued unabated, leaving him deeply frustrated. Life was like this before he became the emperor, and it continued to be so after he assumed the throne. Had he become the emperor in vain? Fortunately, at this time, an official in charge of rituals and music from the previous dynasty, who had pledged allegiance to him early on, emerged from who knows where. After some maneuvering, he successfully convinced the emperor and took the lead in creating a set of rituals that emphasized the grandeur and dignity of the ruler, probably by making some modifications to the framework of the previous dynasty. And when these rituals were carried out for the first time, the old troublemaker was greatly shocked. Observing the orderly ministers and guards moving about in accordance with the ritual protocols, he couldn't help but exclaim, "Only today do I realize the honor of being an emperor." Whether this rumor is true or whether such words have indeed ever been spoken, later generations do not actually know. But if Zeus had the opportunity to hear this story, he would certainly consider the old man a kindred spirit, for at this very moment he was thinking the same. Ever since his early ascension, the divine king had not spent a day without worrying about his future. The shock he received from the power of the primordial gods during the change of eras never faded, keeping him from ever feeling at ease. It wasn't until he also mastered that power that a string in his heart seemed to loosen, and Zeus finally felt a sense of relief. Even though he was still outwitted by Erebus shortly afterward, the initial shock and anger gave way to a clearer understanding of the situation. The Lord of Darkness had not acted personally but had instead borrowed power that did not belong to him. This understandably made Zeus wary, but it also proved something. Just as he, as the divine king, was not entirely free to act as he pleased, perhaps the primordial deities also could not intervene at will in the material world. If that was the case, then a lot of things made sense. "I'm starting to understand, Zephyrus," he said. Walking out from the depths of the island, the divine king was draped in a wide cloak. The sound of the west wind rustled the cloak, and the god of west wind showed no surprise at the sight. "It seems you've discovered some mystery that only the divine king can grasp," Zephyrus said, his voice respectful. "Ha ha ha. Yes, Zephyrus. At least this time, it truly is something only the divine king can comprehend," Zeus replied, shaking his head and in good humor. "I'm slowly understanding why my grandfather was so brutal to the Titans, and under what circumstances the previous generation of deities chose to create humans. They didn't know what faith was back then, but I guess they must have thought something like this. Admiring the beauty of the sunrise, Zeus spoke in a strange tone. Only today do I understand the honor of being a deity. Those Titan gods might not have said it out loud, but that's probably what they were thinking. To behold a world of deities everywhere would make gods seem ordinary. Only through comparison can one find joy, and without mortals, this joy would undoubtedly be reduced. With this in mind, the gods created the Golden Humanity, a very rare event that nearly all deities participated in. Yes, Your Majesty, you always see what others cannot, striking at the very origin of things. Zephyrus spoke softly, also glancing out to sea. While Zeus admired the rising sun, Zephyrus thought of another god who was still trapped and suffering for his actions at the bottom of the sea, tormented day and night by the East Sea. His reasons for creating humanity were probably not just for a sense of superiority over mortals, but now he can only be locked beneath the sea's eye, suffering the East Sea's torture. It is said that Iapetus, the former god of speech, also once supported the creation of humanity, and he was indeed one of the earliest supporters, yet his power was the weakest among the Titans. Zeus continued. But you are different, Your Majesty. The weak can only produce ideas, while the strong can bring them to fruition. Iapetus and his progeny created the silver and the bronze generations, but only you are the true master of this world. This time, Zephyrus's words contained a hint of sincerity, which was also the reason for his pursuit of power. And in front of him, listening to the flattery of the god of west wind, Zeus once again laughed heartily. Ha ha ha! That's what I like about you, Zephyrus. Even though I know you are flattering me, I just love to hear it. Chapter 522. Heroic Spirit _2. Just as he said, Zeus knew that the god of west wind was merely offering flattering words, but he still felt very pleased. After all, no other gods ever spoke to him like that, especially those with power greater than intermediate divine power. In this light, Zephyrus suddenly stood out, and so, as they engaged in casual conversation, time ticked away. It wasn't until the night began to fade, and the sun peeked out with a faint glow in the east, that Zeus finally remembered some serious business he had to attend to. He didn't summon Zephyrus today just to listen to his flattery, although it indeed made him quite happy. He actually had another important matter. Zephyrus, my most trusted subordinate, you have always been loyal to me. So now, I have a task for you to complete. His eyes slightly narrowed. Zeus's expression became formal. Beside him, the god of west wind immediately stated, Your Majesty, as long as it's within my capabilities, I will certainly get it done for you. Of course, you can do it. Zephyrus, you have quite a number of believers, right? Yes, Your Majesty. Thanks to your blessings. Every god in Olympus has their own believers. Not sure what Zeus meant, but acknowledging the obvious fact, Zephyrus nodded in agreement. Yes, everyone has them. It seems like anyone could try, but they're not as obedient as you. Shaking his head slightly, Zeus did not wish to dwell on this. He believed that time and shared interests would gradually change everything. For now, he needed to establish these shared interests. By that time, perhaps many of the titans and deities who he currently had no way with would voluntarily join his camp without the need of coercion. Zephyrus, do you know that in recent years, as gods gain more understanding about humans' faith, each of them has developed their own ways to garner belief. But in my view, it all comes down to two expressions: the fear of the unknown and the yearning for the beautiful. A precise exposition, Your Majesty. Zephyrus complimented again, while Zeus simply waved his hand and continued, As gods, it is very easy for us to instill fear in mortals. But if we wish for them to yearn, it's not that simple. That's why not long ago, I created a world on Mount Olympus, attempting to solve our dilemma. Exclamation point. With a change in expression, the god of west wind almost couldn't contain his shock. Creating a world within Mount Olympus, a feat that had gone unnoticed by others. Is this the power of the divine king? Don't be so surprised. It's not that difficult a task. But Zephyrus, the task I want you to do is also related to that place. Appearing quite casual, Zeus naturally claimed the existence of Asgard as his own achievement, readily accepting the admiration from his subordinate. Now that place had already been cleared by him, showing no sign of previous inhabitants, so Zeus wasn't afraid of anyone discovering its truth. But what he wanted to discuss wasn't this issue, rather it was something else. Early in the exploration of this otherworldly divine kingdom, despite most of it having been destroyed, Zeus still found an existence with some utility. It seemed to be a place where Odin's lingering thoughts had once dwelled, and it revealed itself with the disappearance of these remnants. That place was called Hall of Valor by the original residents of the divine kingdom, and through the murals in the palace, Zeus also learned of its former use. As its name implies, this palace was where the deity race of Asgard once nurtured human heroic spirits, possessing the capability to nourish and maintain the spirit. So although the number of heroic spirits it could retain wasn't high, if carefully selected, each could have extraordinary combat prowess. However, what Zeus needed was not a few capable heroic spirits. What he truly wanted to learn was how these heroic spirits were created. But some things remain a mystery, and they do not clarify simply because one's power is greater. Thus, Zeus ultimately failed to learn that technique, managing only to grasp a surface-level understanding. Initially, the Divine King was somewhat disappointed, and he even thought of Métis. If she were still alive, she probably could decipher the secret of the heroic spirits. But it wasn't long before Themis left Olympus that Zeus suddenly realized that perhaps this cursory knowledge was far more valuable than the real heroic spirits. He did not lack some fighters. They held no real value for him. Zephyrus, in the world that I have created, I bestowed upon it a special rule. There, the souls of life after death can live as they did before. The only difference is, you can use divine power to materialize everything mortals desire, easily fulfilling all their dreams without expending too much strength. Just like the sun. Pointing to the distant rising red sun, Zeus said with a smile, "People just have to look up to see it. And a perfect realm, a kingdom belonging to the gods, is likewise something that mortals aspire to. Your Majesty, so are you intending to prevent souls from returning to the spirit realm, to break the cycle of reincarnation?" With a hint of hesitation in his tone, standing behind Zeus, Zephyrus easily understood the implications of Zeus's words. What perfect realm? Isn't that just like the divine kingdom that the goddess of law supposedly established in the spirit realm? When the existence of the afterlife kingdom created by Themis's followers spread among humans, who knows how many believers it attracted to her? Thus, of course, it's a good thing. It can certainly deepen mortals' faith, but it also invites disaster. Chapter 523, Heroic Spirit _3. The god of the west wind did not know if the divine king could defeat the lord of the spirit realm, but he was certain that making an enemy of another primordial deity just to deepen mortals' devotion was an utterly foolish act. Of course not, Zephyrus. Don't be too rigid. You must understand that we don't actually want mortals to enjoy eternal bliss in the divine kingdom. We just want them to think they can. With a smile curling the corners of his mouth, Zeus gently shook his head. He had no intention of snatching the soul's destiny. That thing was of little use to him in reality. The faith generated by a mere spiritual body was far inferior to that of the living, and he understood the concerns of the god of the west wind. Therefore, Zeus was prepared to further explain his actions, but at that moment, his brows furrowed tightly, and he suddenly turned, looking in the direction of the east. Just then, he had suddenly felt a warning from his soul. "Your Majesty? It's nothing. Something seems to have happened there. You wait here, don't move. As for the matters of the divine kingdom, we'll continue when I return." Boom! Before Zeus could finish his sentence, a thunderous noise came from the east of the earth. The ground split open, rocks flew into the sky, endless dust was lifted high, then drifted in the air, casting a layer of fog over that place. And at the end of that line of sight, a colossal creature seemed to leap out from the earth, appearing and disappearing within the fog. Accompanying it was a proclamation that spread throughout the world. "It looks like I don't need to go and see." With a grave expression, Zeus felt a familiar presence in that direction. You again, Mother Earth. I wondered why you had been so quiet for so long, and I was initially on guard against you. But even you yourself are no match for me. What can the monster you've birthed do to me? With a cold laugh, Zeus instantly recognized the identity of the being emerging from beneath the earth, as Gaia, who had been unaccounted for since their last battle, seemed to be there as well. Although separated by a vast distance and somewhat unable to see clearly, sensing the presence of the other, Zeus was actually reassured. The life that had emerged from beneath the ground did not have a very strong sense of divine power. It seemed not to be a deity, but rather a being like the Titans of old. But it was not surprising. His grandmother always managed to birth strange and peculiar life forms as if the raw wilderness had never been diminished in her. I'll go and see what Gaia is up to, and if need be, I'll take care of it. As for you, Zephyrus, with a wave of his hand, Zeus said indifferently, just watch from the side. Yes, your majesty. The god of west wind nodded earnestly. At times like this, he would not try to demonstrate loyalty by insisting on going together. The enemies Zeus could beat, he might not be able to beat. Those Zeus couldn't beat, he was even less likely to defeat. All he needed to do was to extol the martial might of the divine king afterward. Roar. In an unnamed valley in the east of the earth, every movement of Typhon stirred up a collapse of a layer of the earth or mountain ranges. Before, it had only stuck its head out a bit, but its body remained below the earth. Some life forms similar to that woman. 100 pairs of eyes surveyed the strange world. Typhon saw many creatures resembling Gaia, but they were so weak. Without so much as a gesture, simply under its gaze, they exploded into bundles of flesh and blood, then burned to ashes by fire. Most of these insignificant lives fled in every direction, but some engaged in behavior Typhon found odd. They carried small metal objects, shouting and charging at it. And naturally, they couldn't last any longer under Typhon's gaze. Strange creatures. With a shake of its head, when Typhon came to its senses, it suddenly realized that the woman who claimed to be its creator had disappeared. However, it also noticed that something was approaching from the direction of the east. Another god? They seemed to call themselves that god, divine king, both the same. But it doesn't matter what. 200 eyes glanced toward the Comer. Typhon struggled powerfully. Accompanied by the shaking of tectonic plates, its body finally crawled out from the strata. Without rest, nor needing it, Typhon opened its maw wide, biting at the newcomer. If you want to speak to it, then face its strike first. Chapter 524 Deity Immortality. Lightning streaked across the sky, and at that moment, Zeus's vigilance had reached its pinnacle. Despite his verbal disdain for Gaia, Zeus still regarded his great-grandmother with considerable seriousness. After all, his previous victory over her could be attributed to the suppression of the law, rather than actual brute strength. So no matter what Gaia was doing now, Zeus had decided he couldn't afford to give her any more time to prepare. As for the monster that had been born alongside her, whose form was still hidden beneath the endless dust clouds, in fact, the divine king didn't feel there was any conflict between them. Who decreed that Gaia's offspring must be on the same side as her? The most straightforward example was right before him. Once Gaia, in order to free the Hecatonchires and the Cyclops imprisoned in the abyss, did not hesitate to support Zeus in overthrowing Cronus's rule. But even when Gaia was defeated in front of Mount Olympus, those titans showed no inclination to join their mother goddess in rebelling against the divine court. It seemed they had grown fond of life on Olympus and had no intention of destroying it all. When you think about it, Gaia does seem rather pitiable. After doing so much, no one is grateful. It shows that monsters are monsters for a reason, and there is justification for the gods' disdain for them. With a cold laugh, Zeus cast aside these thoughts. Zephyrus had been left far behind, without the power to traverse the ocean in a short time, while Zeus had already reached land. As he neared the place where the earth had split open, the sky-blocking dust could no longer obstruct the divine king's vision. He could vaguely see it was a life form with 100 heads. Its lower half was a coiling serpent's body. The torso was humanoid with 4 strong arms, and above that were the phosphorescent dragon heads. 200 eyes spouted flames that burned everything. Black vipers' tongues flicked from their mouths, and venom dripped down, looking dangerous and brutal. Truly a born warrior. With a sigh, Zeus gradually slowed down. He made no attempt to conceal his presence, as clouds and thunder converged in the sky, and this commotion successfully attracted the attention of the 100-headed dragons and serpents. State your true name, creature. Standing high above, Zeus spoke authoritatively to Typhon, whose gaze was focused on him. Address me, and present yourself to the king of the sky and the earth. It was hard to tell if the sound was speech or the rumble of thunder, but the deep resonance echoed across the land. The fleeing mortals seemed to believe they had finally been saved, kneeling on the ground and begging for the protection of the deity. But Zeus did not spare them a glance. He was only staring at Typhon, watching it lift one of its heads. The divine king and his fated enemy locked eyes as thunder and fire seemed to intertwine in midair. Then, the next moment, without any warning, a dragon head lunged forward fiercely, attacking Zeus. Bang! The dragon head opened its maw wide but was firmly blocked by the divine king's arm. Typhon's assault was, of course, ineffective, as the battle-hardened Zeus would not be fooled by such tricks. However, at that moment, Zeus's arm trembled slightly, indicating that there was more than just a slight gap in physical strength between their divine bodies. Monster, are you challenging the king of all gods? A peal of thunder exploded, and Zeus's figure shot back. After a brief exchange, he became aware of his own physical shortcomings. But that was to be expected. Deities are not reliant on brute force for battle, and Zeus did not intend to fight on such terms. He decisively created distance and summoned the all-encompassing thunder and lightning. The power of sovereignty was imbued within them, with each silver serpent signifying punishment for those who disobeyed and suppression of the rebels. The supreme power was ready to be unleashed, and if possible, Zeus preferred not to engage in a fight in the mortal realm. Moreover, Typhon's strength had surprisingly exceeded all expectations. Even a mere probing strike had revealed a force that surpassed that of the gods, but Zeus did not see any symbols befitting a great one on his opponent. Although perplexed, the strength of his foe was undeniably real. So, rather than attacking immediately, the divine king attempted communication once again. But the outcome was as expected. Typhon only disappointed him. What responded to the divine king was a pitch-black storm stirred up by the demon. The divine king? The owner of the world. So, you are the divine king. Roar! The deep voice echoed through the mountains, as Typhon raised its hundreds of heads, emitting overlapping screams. Typhon had indeed not expected that the so-called divine king would come before it without waiting for Typhon to seek him out. But this was just as well, it made no difference. Since Zeus had come, it was time to fight. Defeat him or be defeated, proving who truly ruled this world. This was what Typhon sought. As for communication, demons need no exchange, no dialogue. That is a choice for the weak. Boom! Still traveling over the sea, Zephyrus could see the upheaving winds and thunder in the east of the world that shook the heavens and the earth. Although he was a wind god, Zephyrus was certain he couldn't withstand the black storm for even a second. However, that did not mean he intended to stop. After all, he was not going to join the battle. Even as one of the fastest among the gods, by the time he would reach the battlefield, some time would have passed, and by then, the outcome should be somewhat apparent, whether victory or defeat. Chapter 525 Deity Immortality _2. However, just as the god of West Wind was hurrying on his way, he unexpectedly collided with Poseidon, who had also risen from the sea due to the tumultuous ocean. Zephyrus, what are you doing here? What is Zeus doing? And who is that thing he's fighting with? The resonant voice traveled, with Poseidon's blue hair fluttering. He held his trident in his hand, rising slowly from the water. Even from a distance, Typhon's body was too massive. Standing erect, its head could touch the edge of the sky. Stretching out an arm, it sent the moon fleeing in panic. So even if it had just appeared in this world, not only the deities on Mount Olympus but also those in the sea had taken note of Typhon's existence. And soon they also saw Zeus engaged in battle with it. "That is a son of Mother Earth, your majesty. It seems unruly, and the divine king is attempting to subdue it," Zephyrus explained calmly. In front of other deities other than Zeus, the god of west wind did not show such deference. Or rather, if he were so respectful to everyone, it would not reflect the exclusivity and prestige of the king of all gods. Humph, he always manages to find trouble. He claimed that the theft of the golden apple had nothing to do with him, and yet, in the end, he brought forth the goddess of life. Poseidon snorted coldly, but that was all the reaction he showed. Reluctantly as he might be, Poseidon had to admit that the power of Zeus was far beyond his own, and the strength of the demon fighting him needed no further mention. However, neither of the two present felt that the creature posed any real threat to the divine king, for its appearance was too abrupt. Creation's dawn had long passed, and the world had settled into stability. Even among newly born deities, few were powerful. Who, at this time, would believe that a suddenly born demon could defeat the king of all gods? Then, in the next instant, the two deities were forced to believe it. At the far end of the sky, lightning and storm collided. No sound came through because it was all buried by the awe-inspiring power of their clash. From afar, the lightning of the divine king even appeared to have the upper hand, which aligned with the initial judgment of Zephyrus and Poseidon. But what followed made them suddenly change color. That 100-headed monster, the fearsome demon, shook its draconic heads as if realizing that neither the storm nor the flames could harm the king of all gods. So, without hesitation, it charged forward, leaving the world of hurricanes behind and crashing directly into the lightning and thunder. In a moment, scales peeled from Typhon's body, and black blood splashed upon the earth and sea. Even the heads of the beast were severed under the power of the divine king, plunging into the dust below, rolling unknown in direction, yet it showed no fear. For each head cut off, another would grow back. For each drop of blood shed, it moved one step closer to its enemy. Zeus was retreating. He was even retreating towards the direction of the sea. But in the pursuit of the two mighty beings at the boundary between earth and ocean, Typhon's sharp right claw finally caught the divine king's left hand. "I've caught you, worm! You've nowhere to run." A roar mixed with pain and gratification resounded, and under the horrified gazes of the god of west wind and Poseidon, the severely wounded demon pulled hard, wounding the divine king for the first time in this combat. Zeus's left arm was torn off and thrown far into the ocean, stirring waves thousands of feet high. For a deity, this was not a serious injury, but for some reason, the divine king's left arm did not regenerate. Under their watchful eyes, the ferocious dragon's head opened wide its gaping maw, biting Zeus into its mouth, and then began to chew voraciously. Thunder roared within the demon's oral cavity and belly as blood flowed in streams. Yet Typhon seemed even more pleased. The king of all gods, defeated, stunned, the tide of battle had turned sharply, even when they had just recently held the advantage. However, in the next moment they were no longer concerned with shock. For at the edge of their vision, the 100-headed dragon seemed to notice something. One of its heads looked towards the east, and the direction it gazed upon was precisely where Zephyrus and Poseidon stood. Whoosh! Without a word, Poseidon burst into a torrent of water. Then, seemingly from nowhere, a stallion appeared on the distant ocean, frantically fleeing across the sea. As for the west wind, he had long vanished. He had dispersed his divine body into countless streams of air scattering in all directions, clearly planning on not staying even for a moment. A roar! Witnessing the scene unfold, Typhon did not pursue. He simply threw his head back and roared with delight, expressing his scorn and disdain. So this is a so-called god? Even the ants, which crumbled to dust under his gaze, were more interesting. At least they had the courage to attack him, while these deities only knew how to flee. Creak. He savored the taste of the divine king in his mouth. Now only this fellow remained. Typhon intended to finish off his enemy, But to his surprise, despite the massive amounts of blood gushing from his mouth, there was no sign of Zeus's life force waning. It was unexpected, but at that moment, the king of all monsters failed to grasp the crux of the issue. Typhon harnessed his innate abilities to once again prevent the divine body from instinctively regenerating, and then he bit down with all his might. Yet the result once again left him disappointed. Even if the blood of the divine king were drained, his mind remained lucid. His limbs might be severed from his torso, yet his life never ceased. To Typhon's perception, that persistent vigor seemed to mock him as if all his efforts were in vain. Bang! He spat out the disfigured Zeus from his mouth and picked him up. He repeatedly slammed the god's head onto the ground, even causing a gash in the earth. He drew out the tendons and impaled the divine king with them. It seemed like Zeus had given up the struggle, and the lightning gradually faded from him. But no matter what Typhon did, there was not the slightest indication of his life force vanishing. He just wouldn't die, which was completely beyond Typhon's expectations. He knew very well that he could die. If he could die, then why couldn't the divine king? Why? 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 Initial joy turned to anger, and finally to the irritation of being fooled. Typhon could not make sense of it all. His 100 heads roared in unison, a rageful bellow that shook heaven and earth. Tell me, divine king of the earth, tell me, why won't you just D. Boom! The ocean whipped up a ferocious storm. The stars trembled, but Zeus's life remained steadfast. The world's law reacted violently to Typhon's destruction, but he paid it no heed. His 100 eyes stared fixedly at Zeus, observing this undying being. Gods are immortal, monster. After a while, a feeble voice came from beneath Typhon's grasp. Despite Zeus's miserable state, he did not appear panicked at the moment. He fixed his gaze on the immense creature and declared with certainty, "You are not a true god of this world. You cannot seize my throne. The gods are immortal. You have no power over me. The more you do now, the greater the world's punishment for you will be. Your defeat is inevitable. Release me, and with your strength, there should be a place for you in the divine court. I can offer you just below me." Boom! Pressing Zeus's face into the ground, Typhon no longer wanted to hear his blabbering. Dragging the divine king's body, he soared into the sky, the king of all monsters scanning the surroundings. Immortal? He didn't believe it. Everything has its end. That was the answer he derived from the very root of his power. Even the world will perish, let alone a deity. What the earthbound king said was nothing but lies. Since he couldn't kill the most powerful god, then he'd go see how to kill those weaker ones. Scanning his surroundings, Typhon quickly locked onto his next target. There were many gods within his perception, and the place where the presence of deities was densest was none other than the distant Mount Olympus, supporting the sky and the earth. Chapter 526. Calamities and Signposts. In the heart of the eastern lands stood the towering Mount of the Gods, rising high above the mortal realm. The magnificent and sacred Mount Olympus remained as perfect as ever, with palaces of the gods shimmering in divine light of various colors. Exotic flowers and rare herbs adorned the mountain paths. The morning sun shone on the jewel-encrusted halls, casting waves of golden light. Everything was so harmonious, if you only looked at the surroundings. However, unlike the peaceful scenery, the creatures on the mountain were already in complete chaos. Panic and dismay were poorly concealed beneath the gods' forced composure, and the servants around them were even more ashen-faced. Although none among them could see the actual process or outcome of the battle between Zeus and Typhon, some things were quite obvious. For instance, the thunder and storm that had torn through the sky earlier, the abrupt disappearance of the divine king's presence, and the dark clouds suddenly rolling toward Olympus. The divine bodies of the innate deities were notoriously difficult to annihilate. Unless there was an absolute disparity, even with a considerable gap in strength, it was unlikely for one to be defeated in an instant, let alone to be effortlessly suppressed without the chance to fight back. Witnessing this scene, The Olympian gods who had never encountered an outer god nearly lost their nerve. The terrifying sight was akin to Tartarus suddenly gaining wisdom and then coming to the mortal realm to punish the gods. This must be fake. Maybe it's an illusion or something else. Atop the mountain, the goddess of beauty, Aphrodite, forced a smile. By her side cowered a young goddess hiding there. Harmonia, her daughter, the goddess in charge of harmony. This newly born deity was her and Ares' eldest daughter. At least that's what they said she was. After all, Harmony seemed like a child born from both love and beauty, and the brutal war, albeit slightly more influenced by her mother. Moreover, since no other deity claimed the child, she was naturally assigned under the war god's name. It doesn't seem like an illusion. Even if it were, it still proves that this demon likely possesses a power greater than the divine kings. After all, deceiving onlookers with illusions while engaged in battle doesn't seem like something a losing party could pull off. The goddess of wisdom, clad in battle armor, spoke calmly. Unlike the other gods, Athena didn't seem as surprised or fearful of this development. Of course, to others, this was merely the unflappable composure of a great commander. Standing to one side, Aphrodite made no response to Athena's assessment. Not only because they weren't on good terms, but also because she understood that Zeus' current state was likely far from wonderful. Yet she remained on Mount Olympus, as did the other gods, not so much out of loyalty to Zeus but because they were all waiting for someone to make the first move. While the divine kings seemed to have been defeated, they hadn't sensed any signs of a changing era or a shift in the divine throne. Furthermore, this spectacle was indeed beyond the gods' usual understanding, somewhat like two great nations in a standoff, only for an extraterrestrial mechanical deity to suddenly appear. In any case, it wasn't clear how things would settle, and hence the gods were reluctant to be the first to flee. Of course, this was also due to a bit of wishful thinking. After all, Typhon was still tormenting the immortal divine king with various means, and had yet to turn its gaze upon Mount Olympus. The gods couldn't help but hesitate. If possible, they didn't want to flee like homeless dogs. So for a moment silence fell. No one suggested running away, nor did anyone propose checking on the divine king's condition. A peculiar atmosphere persisted on Mount Olympus as if they were hoping for a turn of events. This lasted until a certain moment when the 100-headed dragon finally realized Zeus was not easily harmed and briefly shifted its attention, casting its gaze onto the distant mount of the gods. Even from afar, the majesty of the primordial beast felt ominously close. The next moment, accompanied by a roar, the black storm moved towards the mountain. In almost an instant, mountains were leveled, rivers turned to flatlands, and cities reduced to ruins along Typhon's path. Countless creatures died, and innumerable souls plunged into the underworld. Many mountain gods and river gods that had survived numerous wars finally met a silent end as Typhon passed. And when the gods of Mount Olympus witnessed this, the forced calm they had maintained finally shattered. There would be no more surprises. As the black storm approached Mount Olympus with a speed beyond the gods' reach, panic erupted. Elevated servants and the nymphs, disregarding any semblance of divine dignity, began to flee in all directions. Soon, even the gods could no longer maintain their dignified facade. With Typhon's advance, its ferocious visage unfolded before the gods. But most crucially, all deities saw Zeus, held in the demon's grasp. Barely alive with his limbs severed, the divine king was impaled from top to bottom by a bone. His once splendid garb had been eroded by venom, and his robust body was covered in bite marks as though he had been tortured. Seeing this, Aphrodite could no longer contain her terror. She screamed and fled first. Her action lit the fuse, and in an instant, the gods scattered in a frenzied escape. Chapter 527. Calamities and Signposts _2. The goddess of beauty was the first to flee. She tied herself to her daughter and transformed into a large and a small fish, diving into the rivers around the Mount of the Gods and swimming away. Ares, seeing this, followed closely without the slightest intention of a war god's resolve to fight to the death. The god of light, Apollo, turned into a black eagle and rapidly flew away with the flapping of his wings, while Hera, the always dignified queen of gods, panically transformed into a white cow and then fled toward the west of Mount Olympus. The other deities each displayed their magical powers, using every method they could to try to escape from the doomsday monster that was drawing ever closer. However, their actions did not escape Typhon's 100 eyes, and with an enraged roar, it accelerated its pace towards the Mount of the Gods. The gods were limited in speed, but they were numerous and they scattered in various directions in their flight. By the time Typhon finally reached Mount Olympus, most of the deities had managed to escape. Only a few gods were caught by the furiously enraged progenitor of monsters and dragged back to Olympus. Soon, a bloodbath unfolded in the home of the gods. The non-divine lives were obliterated by Typhon's power, and not one of the other deities fared any better. Their clothes were torn, their pure white skin penetrated by sharp claws, and the gods who couldn't escape screamed in agony. However, to the Lord of Monsters, this was merely beautiful music to its ears, and amidst the accompaniment, it destroyed palace after palace, turning the divine paradise to dust and ashes. In the end, Typhon grasped Zeus's somewhat withered hair, plucked out his eyelids, and forced him to watch how it killed the deities. It mustered all of its strength, selected the deity with the weakest breath from those it had captured. Then its 100 dragon heads took turns, determined to grind her to dust and scatter her ashes. This madness persisted for a long time, so long that the tortured deity had lost the ability to speak. Typhon exhausted its every means, but the result left it infuriated because, in the end, that deity still had not died. It could feel that, given more time, it might have been able to erode the divine body with its strength, but that would not truly kill the deity. Typhon suddenly turned its head. Its gaze fell upon Zeus, nailed to the pillar by its own bones, but unsurprisingly, mockery was all there was in the divine king's eyes. Useless, Typhon, child of Mother Earth, you cannot kill me. You cannot even kill a deity, no matter how weak, Zeus mocked. That is the manifest proof of our divine nobility from birth. Nor can you replace me as the new divine king, for this world will not recognize a monster like you. So even if you confine us to the abyss, it cannot prevent us from walking out on our own. You are powerful, but you cannot defy the laws of the world. Perhaps you plan to be a jailer, to guard forever at the gates of Tartarus? But even that is meaningless. For not even the king of all gods dares to imprison a true god endowed with godhood in a place beyond the reach of the laws of this world. Much less you. If you really do so, perhaps in a year, maybe a decade, you will be forced to confront the suppression of the entire world with your own strength, and before that supreme power, you will have no resistance. Boom! A massive claw broke the pillar, and Typhon held Zeus in its hand. The grating sound of Zeus's bones echoed in its grip. Zeus's face twisted in pain, but he continued to mock the other's impotence with his gaze. Typhon could feel that Zeus seemed to be provoking it, but it had to admit that the Earth's divine king might be right, and it was indeed infuriated. If it couldn't kill him, then anything it did now was meaningless. The world's repulsion towards outsiders had never ceased, and Typhon had felt it for some time. It had ignored it before because it thought it could end everything quickly, but if it couldn't find a way to deal with all of this, then eventually it would fail one day. Roar! With a roar to the sky, Typhon's blood seemed to be boiling. Ever since the moment of its birth, possibly due to a kind of sharp spiritual sense, Typhon always had a feeling that its life was ticking down, as if there was a tremendous threat approaching it and that when it finally arrived, everything would come to an end. Under this inexplicable sense of danger, Typhon focused on the most likely threatening existence, the one claimed to be able to dominate the world, the divine king, but the result made it utterly frenzied. Although it had defeated Zeus, it could not kill him. Do you think it's over, vermin? Gripping Zeus, Typhon shook its dragon wings, stirring up a great storm. It glanced at the towering mount of the gods, tempted several times to destroy it then and there. Even Zeus probably wanted it to act on its rage and do just that, but an instinctual warning ultimately stopped Typhon. Olympus couldn't withstand Typhon's might, but it had yet to find a way to kill the gods. If it went too far now, it might bring about an unintended intensification of the law's suppression, leaving no time for it to do anything else. So, in the end, it flapped its wings, leaving the ruined Mount of the Gods enclosed in a storm, a place it detested yet could not destroy for now. At one moment it stopped, dropped Zeus from its hand onto the ground. It looked at the divine king, its eyes fierce and brutal. Chapter 528. Calamities and Signposts _3. This is just the beginning. I'll search the world. I'll destroy every living creature I see. And in the end, King of the Gods, I'll find a way to kill you. You won't succeed, Zeus said calmly. Fate is on my side. Boom! Nothing can stop me. Just wait to die. And those fleeing vermin, none shall escape. With a casual gesture, Typhon pinned Zeus inside a cave and turned to leave. Zeus's power had been sealed. He could hardly make a ripple. Besides, even if he escaped, what would it matter? He would simply be captured again. Before absolute power, Typhon feared nothing, its wings shaking, 100 eyes surveying the land from above. It would find those fleeing gods one by one and interrogate them. It would discover a way to utterly end the deities, then erase these undying insects from the world. The earth was in chaos, the gods fled in panic. Though Typhon's birth had been brief, it brought immense impact to the world. Even the sea and the sky, untouched by it, trembled at its might. Yet at this moment, as Typhon ascended Mount Olympus, on the outskirts of the land of eternal night, veiled in black, Nyx quietly watched the scene outside. Above the vast ashen land, the nether moon still hung, but in areas invisible to the average person, chains of order coiled around it, keeping the red fog pouring from the void at bay. At the border between the underworld and the upper world, next to the gate by the Acheron River, souls flowed in like tides, streaming towards the all-spirit realm along the waters of the River of Oblivion. These were the newly dead souls, lives lost due to Typhon, and these were just the ones affected indirectly. For those truly killed by the king of all monsters, even their souls could not escape. Typhon had yet to truly step into the underworld, but its influence had already filled this world. However, this had nothing to do with Nyx. Though Typhon's power was formidable, if it dared enter the domain of eternal night, it would stand no chance of victory. After all, in the outside world, Nyx's rank among the mighty might be up for debate. But within her own domain, Mother Night was unquestionably the supreme power. It was not just home field advantage but also her unique characteristics. As the last of the primordial gods born from chaos, Nyx undoubtedly possessed some exceptional abilities. She had never summoned her triphased incarnation in the outside world, since she could not do so herself. But within the land of eternal night, that was a different story.
Trifa said.
It won't be long before it becomes dual-phased, she murmured. But then again, it's not a power I can truly control. Keeping it is meaningless. With a light snort, though she said this, Nyx felt somewhat displeased in her heart. She could now slightly understand the desire of others to shed the obsessions of the world, but only just a little. The thought was fleeting because something else soon caught her attention. On the outer rim of the land of eternal night, along a path once traveled, Lane was approaching her location. Seeing this, Nyx's brow quirked, and with a step forward, her figure blurred and then vanished. So, what you said before about joining you was to fight against that monster? Her voice arrived before her presence. At least from Lane's perspective, Nyx had not yet arrived, but her query had already made its way ahead. That would be a disappointment. I don't see what makes it worthy of my intervention. Everyone wants it dead. Why bother asking me to do what's unnecessary? Of course not, Nyx. Typhon will not die at your hands or mine. I have no time to bother with him, Lane said with a smile as he slightly waved his sleeve. It is merely a catalyst. All I need from it is to create a signpost for the place I have to go to. Chapter 529. The Contradictory Fate. Long before, when Nyx was the first to discover that Princess Io of Pyslacius had vanished at the edge of the world, Lane had already been waiting for this day. No mortal could simply vanish into thin air in front of the primordial gods. and if it happened, it either meant she was not immortal or the world itself was responsible. However, Io, who had been oppressed by Zeus, obviously wasn't some hidden important figure, so following the legends of later generations, Lane easily locked onto the only possible conclusion. Since the existence of the 9 realms proved that chaos wasn't the only world within the void, the closely related mythological system from the legends naturally also had the possibility of appearing. The mortal princess had already taken a step ahead, and the gods were soon to follow after. Although Lane didn't think they would really enter that world like Io had, at the very least the gods could bring him to the gates of Hemenu. I remember now, you had spoken of this before. When the 100-headed beast attacks Mount Olympus, and the gods scatter in flight, is this another one of your prophecies? The thought flashed by, and Nyx instantly recalled the cause and consequence of this matter. Compared to Lane, she was the first to have noticed the odd disappearance of Io and had actively sought Lane for an explanation. However, with so many years passing without any news, Nyx had long since pushed the matter to the back of her mind. Moreover, Typhon's birth had come a bit too suddenly, and Zeus's defeat had been too swift, so much so that until Lane approached her, she hadn't connected this matter with the disappearance of the human princess at all. That's the matter. Nodding, seeing Nyx had remembered, Lane saved the need for further explanation. I see it's that foreign realm you mentioned, but how will you follow them? Under the ever-shifting veil, the Lady of the Night seemed to raise an eyebrow. Having witnessed Io's disappearance firsthand, she was certainly aware of the difficulty of this matter. Let alone determining which deity would travel to the so-called Hemenu world. Even if he accurately predicted the node of fate, could he really follow the other's trail to find the path to another world? Under the force of the world's power, a mortal could vanish before her eyes without a trace, and no matter what, she could not find the other's whereabouts, let alone now when a deity is the one vanishing. Even if he followed the Olympian gods closely, it was likely that at the moment they too vanished, it would be impossible to detect where the other had gone. And in the void outside the world, without a definite target, exploration was meaningless. I know, even though mortal souls originate from me, I still cannot sense the whereabouts of that human princess. However, it is different for gods, and among the Olympian gods, there is one whose existence is intimately related to me. With her existence, I may not be able to foresee the method of transition, but I can definitely lock onto her location after the transition. Explaining casually, Lane had no intention to elaborate further. He looked over the silence of the night, dotted with somnus blossoms, and finally confirmed, "Do you still need to do something? There's nothing that needs to be done, and even if there were, it wouldn't need me to do it." Without asking further, and also glancing back at the depths of her domain, Nyx shook her head indifferently. There, one of her triphased incarnations was releasing its power, though not under her control. Nyx had no particular reaction to this, for every time a node of the world's destiny came, similar things happened. She just waved her hand and vanished within her domain ahead of Lane. Lane immediately followed, for they needed to first go to the void outside the world, which was still anchored by the existence of the world, and then follow the markers to find the location. Soon, the land of eternal night returned to calmness. There remained only the constant darkness of night and the faintly seen creatures under the light. Outside Mount Olympus, the black storm continued to rage over the Mount of the Gods, at a time when the gods had just fled. The king of all monsters, hoping to kill the gods, was destroying everything atop the mountain, while the figure of Zeus, nailed to the pillar by his bones, could faintly be seen. Standing in a secluded valley, Athena gazed at the scene. The dark-haired maiden no longer bore her martial attire but was clad in a white gown adorned with pale golden patterns. Her soft hair cascaded from her neck and shoulders, reaching her delicate waist, showing no signs of hurried escape. This was normal, for during her journey in the fantasy world, Athena had already seen the records of the battle against Typhon among those intricate texts. Although much of the content there starkly contradicted reality, the goddess was not surprised. Because no matter how one looked at it, that fantasy world originated from Zeus, and much of its history seemed somewhat fabricated, almost like a play with Zeus as the leading character. He was portrayed as the master of fate, unbeaten in all, with the king of all monsters only able to win by stealing his weapons. Even the former divine king had been defeated in combat by Zeus, who then imprisoned him forever. But the current situation was different, so the maiden bestowed with wisdom easily categorized it as one potentiality of the future. Some of those so-called histories could be believed, but certainly not all. Chapter 530. The Contradictory Fate _2. At least I have never seen any record of the divine king being torn apart and hung on Olympus by Typhon. A faint smile played upon Athena's lips, almost conveying a hint of happiness. She caressed the sleeve of her right hand, silently praising her own handiwork. Even during the crisis of the gods' escape, she was not the slightest bit flustered. She had even found time to change her attire, which naturally had its reasons. The former was obviously due to being well prepared, while the latter was simply because the so-called armor of the era was somewhat peculiar, looking quite at odds with a goddess's aesthetic. In terms of daily attire, there was the black dress born with Nyx, and the various knowledge spread throughout the spirit realm by Lane, meaning their design had actually become more modernized. But by comparison, the rest still conformed to the traditional culture of ancient Greece. Under such circumstances, the armor of ancient Greece, let's just say those in the know would understand. Extending this thought, if the Athena of the original trajectory had actually spent her days dressed like that, it wouldn't be hard to comprehend why the craftsman god Hephaestus suddenly became beastly. Of course, in this trajectory he probably wouldn't have the chance. This Typhon is a bit strong, I can't defeat it. Looking in the direction of Mount of the Gods, Athena had to admit that her strength was far inferior to it. Even if her power had surged in the fantasy world, she was still not its match. So confronting it was not a wise move. She needed to think about her next steps. Anyway, it wasn't going to be saving the divine king. Zeus did not need her rescue. Athena was actually curious to see how Zeus, without that god Hermes this time, would manage to escape and then counterattack Typhon. After all, as a demon from beyond, Typhon could not wreak havoc in the mortal world forever. All she had to do was avoid it for now and wait it out. The underworld is out of the question. I don't know why, but it gives me a very dangerous feeling. The starry sky could be an alternative. The vast expanse of the cosmos is even broader than the earth. Hiding there, no one would find me, but it's only for avoidance. Tilting her head slightly, the black-haired girl looked towards the east. It was the direction of the sea, and where her maternal grandfather resided. Usually, for various reasons, it was not easy for her to contact the god of the ocean and his consort, and Oceanus probably didn't care much for familial affection. But now that Zeus was in trouble, he probably wouldn't notice her movements, and even without familial love, Athena still had leverage. Then, making her decision, Athena was ready to head to the East Sea as soon as Typhon left. But in the next moment, she took a step back, her expression turning alert. For some reason, in that instant, Athena felt like she was mistakenly wandering into the fantasy world while exploring memories, and this time the feeling was unprecedentedly strong. She wanted to do something, but in reality, she didn't manage to do anything. Space-time seemed to freeze at that moment, and her thoughts stopped flowing. Whoosh! Without resistance, without struggle, soundlessly, Athena's form was erased inch by inch. Under a supreme power, her place of existence was instantly switched. At that moment, a path that both existed and did not exist emerged between chaos and Heminu world. The worlds might carved existence from non-existence, and Athena, along with other deities, appeared on the path. Then propelled by the mighty force, they moved forward. In that instant, all deities lost consciousness, their thoughts frozen in the previous moment. Apart from Athena, who had a similar experience, no one sensed the slightest omen. And behind them, two figures also began to move, following the path anchored by the world's power, chasing after the gods ahead. Everything happened in a blink of an eye. Time held no meaning for such a power. According to the script written by Destiny, the gods were supposed to find themselves in another world after a moment of oblivion, a world different from Chaos's, yet one already eroded by his power. They were meant to consume and assimilate the native gods there, aiding chaos in finishing this world-level consumption. That's how it should have been, had not everything started so many years ahead of schedule. However, there are no ifs in reality, and in the moment when the gods' positions approached the bounds of Heminu world, everything froze suddenly. Crack! A sound, as if originating from the root of all things, thundered, reverberating through the empty void. It seemed like the world itself collided, but it wasn't between two different worlds. It was chaos colliding with himself. Destiny's trajectory was in motion, yet also tearing apart. The flow of time became muddled and even started affecting the stability of the present world of chaos. Simultaneously, the force that shrouded the gods began to show cracks, allowing for a slight contact between inside and outside. What happened? Surrounded by grogginess and darkness, Athena, floating between sleep and wakefulness, faintly heard a pleasant female voice ask, "Aren't you a destined deity?" Obviously, destiny and the order of chaos have collided unavoidably. Another familiar male voice rang out, and Athena struggled to open her eyes. But after several attempts, she ultimately did not succeed.